In this question, a scientist wants to determine what mass of nitrogen trichloride, NCl3, could be made from 17.4 litres of nitrogen gas, N2, at STP. So our first step is going to be balancing our equation. So I'm going to set up a table so I can make sure I've got the right number of each element in the products and the reactants. So in the unbalanced equation, we've got Cl2, so 2 Cls in the reactants, and N2, so 2 Ns in the reactants, and we've got NCl3, so that's 1 N and 3 Cls in the products. So right now we can see that neither the chlorine nor the nitrogen are balanced. I'm going to start by adding a 2 on the right hand side in front of the NCl3 so that I can make that nitrogen balance. I'm going to recalculate how many of each we have. So we still have 2 chlorines and 2 nitrogens in the reactants. In the products, we now have 2 sets of NCl3. So that's 2 Ns and 3 times 2, which is 6 Cls. So our nitrogens now appear to balance, but the chlorines don't. However, since Cl2 on the reactants can be multiplied by 3 to get 6, I'm going to add a 3 on the left, and I'm just going to add up again to check that that's correct. So now I have 3 sets of Cl2, so that's 6 Cls in the reactants. I've got 1 set of N2, so that's 2 Ns in the reactants. In the products, I've got 2 sets of NCl3, so 2 Ns and 2 sets of 3 Cls, which is 6 Cls. So now both my chlorine and my nitrogen are balanced. So I'm going to go ahead and enter those numbers. And again, I'm entering a 1 if there's only one of something. We don't normally do that when we're writing an equation, but on this website, you do need to enter the 1. Okay, so we've got our balanced equation. Now let's think about our question and what we're looking for. So we are told that we start with 17.4 litres of nitrogen gas, N2. So that's my starting point. I've got 17.4 litres of nitrogen gas. We're asked to find what mass of nitrogen trichloride, NCl3, could be made. So our goal is finding the mass, the grams that is, of NCl3. So to get from liters of nitrogen to grams of nitrogen trichloride, first we're going to have to go via moles. So my first step is going to be finding out how many moles of N2 that I have. Then I'm going to be able to convert moles using my equation. So moles of nitrogen is going to be converted to moles of nitrogen trichloride. And then finally, that can be converted into mass of nitrogen trichloride. So those are going to be my 3 steps. And I'm going to go ahead and start making my table for dimensional analysis. So I'm going to start by putting the question in that first box, which is 17.4 litres of N2. And then I'm going to do my conversions in the 3 columns that I have, each for my 3 steps. My first step is going from litres of nitrogen into moles of nitrogen. So I'm going to want to have litres of nitrogen on the bottom of my fraction so that will cancel out. I'm getting into moles of nitrogen. So that's going to go on the top of my fraction. And we're going to be using our conversion factor for the volume of a gas at STP. Remember, STP is standard temperature and pressure. And at STP, 1 mole of a gas, for example, nitrogen, has a volume of 22.4 litres. So that's going to be my conversion factor that I'm using in the first step of my conversion. And I need to make sure the top and bottom of my fraction in my dimensional analysis table are equal. So on the top we'll have 1 mole of nitrogen, and on the bottom we'll have that equal to 22.4 litres of nitrogen. Okay, my next step, converting from moles of nitrogen to moles of nitrogen trichloride. So again, since I want to cancel out moles of nitrogen, that's going to go on the bottom of my dimensional analysis table. And I'm trying to get into moles of nitrogen trichloride. So that's going to go on the top. And then I'm using my equation, my chemical equation, to find the ratio between them. So we've got 1 mole of nitrogen gives 2 moles of nitrogen trichloride. So my conversion factor here is 1 mole of nitrogen gives 2 moles of nitrogen trichloride. So that's my conversion factor for this step. So I'm going to have 1 on the bottom with my moles of nitrogen and 2 on the top with my moles of nitrogen trichloride. Awesome. Okay, last step is getting from moles of nitrogen trichloride into grams of nitrogen trichloride. So to do this, I'm going to need to find my molar mass of nitrogen trichloride from the periodic table. So I'm going to look for the relevant elements. Here I've got nitrogen, and here I've got chlorine. So we've got nitrogen, which has a molar mass from the periodic table of 14.01 grams per mole. I've got chlorine, which from the periodic table has a molar mass of 35.45 grams per mole. But my compound is NCl3, which is a nitrogen plus 3 sets of chlorine. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my molar mass for nitrogen, which is 14.01, plus 3 sets of my molar mass for chlorine, which is 35.45. And I'm going to put that in my calculator. That gets me a molar mass of 120.36 grams per mole. So I had 120.36 grams per mole for nitrogen trichloride. And remember what that means is that in 1 mole of nitrogen trichloride, I have 120.36 grams of nitrogen trichloride. So that's going to be my conversion factor for my last step here. So I'm going to have moles of nitrogen trichloride on the bottom. Since I want that to be cancelled out, I want that to divide with the moles on the top. And then I want to get what I'm trying to find, which is grams of nitrogen trichloride, and put that on the top. Finally, I'm going to fill in my numbers so the top and the bottom equal each other. And we know 1 mole of nitrogen trichloride gives 120.36 grams of nitrogen trichloride. Awesome. So that's what we're trying to find, mass of nitrogen trichloride. So I've ended up in the right units. So we're ready to go ahead and do our calculation. Now remember, everything on the top multiplies together. Everything on the bottom multiplies together. And then we divide top by bottom. And any units that are the same on the top and the bottom will cancel out. So our litres of nitrogen will cancel with our litres of nitrogen. Our moles of nitrogen will cancel with our moles of nitrogen. And our moles of nitrogen trichloride will cancel with our moles of nitrogen trichloride. So we're left with 17.4 multiplied by 1 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 120.36 grams of NCl3 divided by 22.4 multiplied by 1 multiplied by 1. So if we put that all on our calculator, we're going to get out an answer of 187 grams. So we can test that in our answer box over here. Awesome. Okay. So with these questions, it's important to identify what are we starting with and what are we ending up with. It might be liters, it might be grams, it might be moles. Then we need to figure out what steps we need to take to get from one to the other. And we always need to convert between 2 different compounds using the moles from the chemical equation. So your first step will be getting your starting value into moles. Then you'll be converting from moles of one compound to moles of another compound. And finally, if you need to, you'll be converting from moles to another quantity for that same compound.